When has a gut feeling saved your life? Serious. Report comments that violate these rules. Attention. Serious tag notice. Jokes, puns, and off-topic comments are not permitted in any comment, parent, or child. Parent comments that aren't from the target group will be removed, along with their child replies. I almost got kidnapped once. I was like 23 or so. I was walking down my street at a little after dusk. I saw a van approaching a little ahead. No lights on. Didn't think much of it due to the time of day. The van slowed down and almost started creeping. As I was approaching this part of the sidewalk which had a tall solid wall fence to a community. This gave me some pause in that quick moment. For me to keep walking, I'd have to go between the wall and the van. In the little time it took me to take a couple of steps, and as the van was getting close, I noticed that the side door was slowly sliding open. The one thought in my mind was, why isn't the light turning on inside the van? When you open the door of a vehicle, the light should come on inside it, unless you deliberately switch that off. And I just ran to the median. I ran in front of the van and across the street, because if they're gonna have some use of road kill me, have at it, but they're not getting me in one glorious piece. Immediately, the van took off like someone lit it on fire. From a slow crawl to full speed. As I looked after it to see the plates, I noticed it had no plates, and still no lights. I called the police, of course. They sent cars out, and didn't find the van. I never had anything like this happen again, and I'm just an ordinary person, so I don't suspect it was targeted. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But they're not getting me in one glorious piece. Made me laugh. Great story, good instincts. I was driving a friend home late at night when I was around 21. She lived in a pretty rural area outside of St. Louis, Missouri, and about a quarter mile from her house was an old abandoned farm and farmhouse. I always thought of this place as non-threatening, as she told me she and her two sisters would go there as kids, and they found an attic full of cool things, including a trunk of vintage woman's clothing and old love letters, like something out of a movie. Anyway, I'm driving her home. And it's a hot humid Missouri summer and we have the windows open as the late night had offered some cool air. We are also singing at the top of our lungs. We pass the abandoned farm and I drop her off at her house. I wait long enough to see she makes it inside and I head back out the way I came. I'm driving along and I get to almost where the farm is and I see two things in the road. My danger meter goes off as I had just driven this road and there was nothing there. I put the windows up and make sure the doors are locked. I get closer and I realize the items are two car batteries spaced out in the road, which was basically a one-lane road in a way that I would have to get out and move them to drive on the road. I immediately knew I wasn't getting out of the car, so I picked the side of the road that had the lesser ditch and I gunned it. I was driving a little SUV and remember feeling the car run over branches and things in the little ditch, but I just gunned it and got out of there. All the way home I felt creeped out and kept checking my rearview mirror. I called my friend the next morning and told her what had happened, and we both agreed it was weird. Shortly after that I moved to another state and didn't think much of it after that. Fast forward to 2 to 3 years later, when I was back visiting my hometown. I randomly ran into my old friend and she ran up to me with wide eyes and grabbed my arms. She asked me if I remembered what I told her that night. I said yes, and she proceeded to tell me that not too long after that had happened her family was awakened in the middle of the night to someone pounding on their sliding glass door. Her dad went to check and saw two naked, injured women and let them in, and called 911. They had been abducted from St. Louis City, about 40 minutes away, by two men, and brought to the old, abandoned farmhouse where the men tortured and raped them. The women somehow managed to get free and ran to the only light they could see, the light over my friend's garage. They survived, but the men were never caught. There was evidence the men had been going there for a while. My friend was convinced they had put the batteries in the road to lure me out of the car. I'm just really glad my gut told me not to. Edit, grammar. The same sort of thing happened to me. I live in rural Connecticut and my mom was driving me down dark, twisty roads to my friend's house, and in the middle of the road was yellow caution tape, not police line. Do not cross tape, but just tape that said portion, blocking the whole road. It had been clearly ripped and tied back together in some places. My mom examined it and gunned it in reverse and got out of there fast that same night. Some woman had gotten out to examine it and had gotten back in the car to call the police because she found it suspicious, but not suspicious enough to leave. Before calling 911, she was grabbed out of her car, but the people who grabbed her didn't know she had called 911 and the police rolled up as the car was driving away with her in the trunk. They chased them down and she lived. But it was scary. Trust your gut with roadblocks. When I was around 18, I was on a back road with some friends and a girl I didn't know was driving really fast. Now, I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie and I have always enjoyed a calculated risk in the name of a good time, but on this occasion I told her to either slow the fuck down or let me out. I literally had to start screaming at her before she listened and slowed down. A week later she crashed on that same stretch of road at 90 miles per hour, killing her and the 3 passengers of her car. Yikes. My husband is a state trooper and has always said the wreck that sticks with him the most was a group of 4 17-18-year-olds in a car speeding on the freeway. One of the kids was screaming and begging the driver to let him out. The driver pulled over and let him out as he and the other 2 passengers made fun of him for being a pussy and not wanting to have fun. A couple miles later, the driver flew off an overpass, went over the guardrail, and onto the freeway below, killing him and the other 2 passengers instantly and ejecting one out of the car. Luckily there was no one below that they fell onto. My husband always remembers that kid who demanded to get out and how terrified and shaken he was when he walked up on what happened and was able to explain that he was in the car with them just minutes prior and would have been dead had he not been a pussy. Few years ago I was at a bar with a couple of friends. All was good. We were drinking and having fun. All of a sudden, we heard this discussion taking place just a couple of tables from us. 2 guys decided to have a shouting/threat match. I stopped everything to pay attention to them. My friends were making fun of me, saying I was gossipy. One of the guys in the discussion got up and left. Immediately after he left I told my friends we had to go. Now, let's go now. They didn't get why I was like that, but I'm their friend since forever. They reluctantly agreed. We went to a different bar in a different neighborhood, but I couldn't take my mind off of those 2 guys. The next day, the news were talking about a bar fight. Apparently the guy who got up went home, grabbed a gun, and came back for a drive-by. Killed 4 people in the process. My grandpa taught me to never ignore my gut, and I couldn't be happier to have listened. Edit. A few words. Edit 2. A few people have approached me asking if I already had published this story before. I honestly don't remember if I did. If I did, I'm sorry. Didn't wanna repost an old story. A lesson that I learned in high school, and it always proves true mid altercation or argument. If one leaves the place briskly and suddenly walk away, the other guy has not run away. No, he just was fetching a weapon or calling up his buddies. It is clear and obvious warning sign. I'm glad that you know. My now wife and I did the long distance thing in college, and I planned on doing my normal routine to visit her, leave Chicagoland in the morning, get to her early afternoon on Friday. Well, I'm closing my store on Thursday night and get a feeling I should leave that night. So I said back quote F it and left that night. A little after lunch on Friday, tornado sirens go off. I don't think anything of it until I head back home Sunday and drive through a town about half hour north of her. It got lit up by the tornado. I quickly realized that I had left at my normal time. I would have been smack dab in the middle of tornado. When the tornado that decimated Greensburg, Kansas came through, my family and I were on our way to my grandparents' house. We drove through Greensburg. My mom noticed the storm was getting really bad and decided not to stop until we got to my grandparents' house. By the time we got to their house, it was on the news that the tornado had leveled the town just minutes after we left the city limits. I don't remember ever seeing a storm quite so ominous. It was nearly totally dark outside, but something about that particular storm, I don't know. It was freaky. Edit. Spelling. Lump in my right breast, 43 years old. Clean mammogram 5 months earlier. I just knew. 4 different doctors told me it was nothing. and to come back in a year. I did not, and found a fifth. Yeah, I had to argue my way into being diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of breast cancer. On the bright side, Thursday was my 5 years all clear date. Felt hinky about one of many growing skin spots. Took 6 doctor visits asking they look at skin spot, all saying it's nothing, don't worry, but cat sniffing the spot continuously made me worry. Took this evidence to new doc on day dermatologist happened to be visiting. My doc laughed it off like all the others, but said a dermatologist might be interested in weird shape. Dermatologist took one look, sniffed it, said get biopsy right now. Biopsy showed aggressive sideral cancer under the skin. The spot was the back quote iceberg tip. Got a big lump of me cut out, but just in time. A pain in the lungs when I inhaled. I've never been stabbed, don't know what it's like, but the pain should have been equal to it, if not worse. It had happened before, years ago. Some hot water in the shower and the pain was gone. My wife, then girlfriend, insisted on going to her. I insisted on hot water. I feel like we should go and see a doctor, she had said. I was diagnosed with pulmonary embolism on both lungs. Doctor said 1 or 2 more hours and you were gone. So yeah, I owe my wife one. My mum knew something was wrong with me when I was younger. Doctors didn't want to see me for another 2 weeks. Mum went into a blind rage over the phone telling them that she was taking me to get checked, whether they liked it or not. We got to the GP. He puts a stethoscope on my back and smells my breath. Then says, we need to get him to hospital now. Turns out I have type 1 diabetes, and if I'd waited another day I would have died. Edit. The breath part is due to the buildup of ketones in the blood, as I was in the severe stages of diabetic ketoacidosis. Edit 2. It smelled like apples. I have a similar story about my sister. She always had pain in her knees and back. My mother took her to a lot of doctors, but they all said the same. She is too young for arthritis. It's just growth pain, and it will go away over time. My mother knew there was something wrong, and she brought my sister in a hospital and got on doctor's nerves until they checked all the markers. They found the markers. My sister has an autoimmune disease called Wegener's granulomatosis, and without help she would have died after maximum 7 years of horrific pain. Always hated the dad scout leader in my area growing up. Just seemed like a real creep. Hated seeing him at community events, soccer games, back to school nights, etc. 10-year-old me staged a hissy fit to end all meltdowns with me slamming doors, crying and breaking shit to avoid being moved from Cub Scouts, where the moms ran things, to avoid Boy Scouts. Turns out the scout leader was molesting 3 or 4 of the boys in the troop and threatening to kill them if they ever spoke. Justice found him, and he's in prison. Glad you avoided that. It honestly breaks my heart that people would do something like that. We really need male role models for young boys, and for someone to use that position of trust and hurt them so badly in that way is just sick in a way that's hard for me to process. I get really bad vibes from the car park in work. It's a giant, poorly lit multi-story, and I've seen enough horror films to know I shouldn't be taking it lightly. Whenever I get in, I pay attention to the floors people call the lifter to keep an eye on where they're going. One time a guy got in front of me and pressed 6 while I was parked on 8. He didn't get out at 6 and was still in the lift as I got to my floor. I leave, he doesn't, so I guess he's remembered he's on another floor. But just before I get to the dark area with all the cars, I turned back. This guy had waited about 30 seconds, therefore held the lift to wait, and silently emerged to follow me. I just stopped and stared him down. He had a deer in the headlights look, and turned straight back to the lift. I have no idea if it saved my life, but it freaked me the fuck out. Whenever I get in, I pay attention to the floors people call the lifter to keep an eye on where they're going. I do this too. I also never tell the cab and or Uber driver where I'm actually going. I always get dropped off a few houses or a few blocks away, depending on the area. My ex-husband had a friend who I just didn't like, although I could never explain why. He was very handsome, always smiling, very respectful speech, always called me ma'am or miss, even though he's a few years older than us. My ex used to give me shit for expressing my feelings about this guy. I was never rude to him when he'd stop by, but I did have trouble hiding my creeped out vibe. Fast forward to 3 years later. Guy is convicted of indecent liberties and statutory rape of his girlfriend's daughter, 12-year, and a 14-year female. I remember meeting the dad of a student. I got an awful vibe off of him. People always talked about how nice he was and how in love he and his wife were. I always thought she really loves him, but he's just not right. Found out years later he'd been raping his older daughter every time his wife was away for a conference. Not the child I was teaching, her older sister. I was taking my mom to a follow-up appointment for back surgery the month before. The freeway was closed due to a car accident and Life Flight was called to transport the people injured in the accident. The highway patrol was funneling everyone off of the freeway to the right side exit. I had the strongest feeling we needed to move to the left farthest lane. So I did. No more than a minute after I moved over, a garbage truck came barreling down the freeway and crashed into the car that was in front of us in the other lane so fast that it lifted the front end of the truck and it landed on top of the car. We were in a tiny sports car that would have crumpled like a tin can under the weight of a garbage truck and definitely would have killed my mom and me in a second. Edited for clarity. The sports car was a 1999 Mercury Cougar. I'm 5 feet 10. Swede/Spaniard mix. It was tiny for me. Ha ha ha. Glad you both are well and you trusted your feelings. It didn't happen to me, but was told by my mom. When she was pregnant with my older sister, her and her family decided to go hiking in the mountains. On the day of the hike she suddenly felt discomfort and unconformable. So she stayed behind while the rest of her family went for the hike. Her family got lost, and if it wasn't for my mom staying behind, they wouldn't have gotten help. Keep in mind that there was no cell phones back then, so if you got lost, it was a lot harder to contact rescue to come find you. Funny enough, my sister was also born during an earthquake. Different story. I think your sister has superpowers. She predicted and prevented her own death as a fetus by communicating with your mom subliminally, obviously, and the earth shook when she was born. A few weeks ago, I had just left my apartment complex and was heading to a friend's. I pulled out of my driveway and up to the traffic light and stopped. I was in the left turn lane, light was red. It was late out and there wasn't many people on the road. I watched as the light went yellow and then red for through traffic. One guy ran the tail end of the yellow. Like usual, my turn. Light goes green. I have an arrow blinking for me to turn left. I looked both ways and there was no one around, and I just didn't go. I cannot explain what happened other than something inside me just said don't go. So I sat there staring at the green light. A couple seconds later a car came screaming through the red light, through the intersection. Probably doing about 100 km/h. In the lane I would have been turning into. They were going so fast their vehicle had a bounce to it. If I had turned my car would have been destroyed, and me along with it. I sat there through the whole next light cycle and then turned, pulled over and called my sister. It was a ghostly feeling. I'm a light jumper. I look both ways, but I'm impatient, and I cannot explain what stopped me from going the second that light went green, but I'm glad it did. Edit, to correct me calling it an orange light yellow. Amber.